All right, well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first WISTEC training for 2022. And my name is Laura Plummer, and I am the statewide Assistive Technology Program Coordinator for Wisconsin. This training is brought to you from WISTEC, which is Wisconsin's Assistive Technology Act program. And we are located within the Bureau of Aging and Disability Resources within Wisconsin's Department of Health Services. So we are welcoming people not only from Wisconsin today, but from throughout the country. So that's pretty exciting. A little bit of housekeeping. We do have closed captions are being provided, and you can access those by selecting captions or the more button at the bottom of your screen. We do have sign language.
There's a question about how to see the interpreters.
I'm getting to that. Yes, thank you. We do have 2 sign language interpreters. You can pin those interpreters. You may need to go up into the right top and select view, and then you should be able to see those. If you are still having difficulty, feel free to pop that in chat, and myself or Ashley Walker can assist you with that. And a reminder, this is webinar format. So that means that your cameras are turned off, as well as your microphones are muted. We're encouraging you to use the chat or the Q&A for questions. And this webinar will be recorded, and it will be archived on the WISTEC YouTube channel. Usually takes a few weeks for that to be archived. We are providing CRC credits for rehabilitated counselors and CEU credits. These will be available for anyone attending the live presentation, but not the archive. And you will get the information on that with your post-webinar survey. So you will need to complete that survey, fill out your information, answer a couple questions, and then within the next month, you will receive your CRC and CEU documentation. So with that, I am very excited to introduce Haley Strickler, who is our presenter today. So Haley comes to us from Pennsylvania. She is an AAC services coordinator for TechOwl. And TechOwl is Pennsylvania's Assistive Technology Act program. And she has presented this at the Assistive Technology Industry Association conference earlier this year. And I was very excited about the timeliness of this topic. And I'm going to let Haley share a little bit more, but we are so excited to have you here and look forward to learning a lot today. Thank you.
So hi, good morning, everyone. And I'm so excited to be here and go over this presentation on You Said What? Exploring AAC access to profanity, swearing, and slang. And I want to give a big thank you to WISTEC for inviting me to share this information again with everyone here today. So a bit about me. My background is in speech language pathology. I went to Temple University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and I got both my bachelor's and my master's in speech language hearing from there. And now I actually work for Temple University. So Pennsylvania's AT Act program is TechOwl, and we are a part of the Institute on Disabilities at Temple University. So again, I'm a speech language pathologist. That's my background, and I work exclusively in AAC for Pennsylvania. I am licensed though in both Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and I actually happen to live in New Jersey. So about 5 minutes across a bridge is Philadelphia from my house. So pretty close to that Pennsylvania border. I do have a little bit of background in the public school system. And I worked in several high schools and a couple different school districts in New Jersey before I got my position at TechOwl. So again, I'm really excited to be here. So throughout the presentation too, do feel free to use the chat. I will be keeping an eye on it. So sometimes I might be able to, if I see a question pop up that's relevant to what I'm talking about in that moment, I'm going to try my best to answer it live, but I am also going to try to leave some time at the end to be able to answer those questions that you might have and have a more open discussion about some of those things that you might be more interested in. So I'll try my best, but feel free to put those in the chat or the Q&A. I have them both pulled up on my screen on my end. Just for formalities, I do have some speaker disclosures because I do know that there are CEUs available. So financial, I do receive a salary from Temple University as I am a full-time employee there. And I also do receive some compensation for private speech therapy work that I do. Outside of that job. Non-financial, as a speech pathologist, I am a member of ASHA, which is the American Speech Language Hearing Association, and I am a member of Special Interest Group 12, or I'm an affiliate of SIG 12, and so that's the special interest group for AAC. Other than that, I don't have any other disclosures. So we'll jump right on into things. Our learning objectives for today. So just like the title of this presentation says, we're going to be exploring profanity and swearing and a little bit of slang, but we're definitely going to be looking at a lot more of these things. But after this session, I hope that these are kind of like the base points that you're able to take away from today. So you'll be able to identify 2 or more examples of age-specific taboo words and concepts for each life stage. You'll also be able to discuss 3 uses of taboo language in social communication. And then you'll also be able to compare at least 2 AAC devices or language systems and their access to taboo words and concept vocabulary. So before we jump even more into things, I do want to start with a content warning. This presentation will discuss some controversial topics, and there's going to be some explicit images later on when we look at symbols and vocabulary sets for devices. I will be giving another content warning when we get closer to that more explicit imagery, in case that is a time that you would prefer to drop off or hide your screen or minimize your screen, just so if you're not comfortable looking at that. In terms of those images, it will just be examples of vocabulary on different devices, like labeling of body parts, things like that. But just a heads up to expect that later. Again, I'll give another content warning prior to that being shown on the screen. But we're also going to be talking about explicit language. We're going to be talking about sexual health terminology, as well as references to abuse. So swear words, they're going to be said, they're going to be read, and they're also going to be shown on the slides here today. And one of the big things that I usually say is that use of profanity is a personal choice, but so are our boundaries as well. And with that being said, my personal boundary is against the use of identity slurs, so I will not be using those words, and those will not be shown on my slides. I will reference them, though, as a concept. And some of these words and concepts, they can be triggering, of course, so please be mindful of yourself and your own needs. And if you need to log off to be safe, please feel free to do so. I also do want to mention too that I'm going to be using a variety of person first and identity first language. Again, I say that word choice is a personal choice, and this is really up to an individual and their communities to decide on what language that they prefer, whether it's identity first or the person first language. And so because of that, I want to try to be as inclusive as I can be and be respectful of and to represent both preferences and identities. So you're going to hear me use both person first and identity first language interchangeably throughout my presentation. So just to get started with a little icebreaker, I'd like to hear the best bad word that you know. So please, no slurs though against identity groups. But if anyone has a really good curse word, bad word, I'd love to see it in the chat. So if anyone wants to give me a good one, I'll read it aloud. So first off, we got the classic fuck. Oh, big booty hoe. That's nice. What else do we got? Bollocks. Shit. That's another classic one. You can be creative too with some of these. Oh, a see you next Tuesday. Yes, absolutely. That one's actually very historical too. Fun fact. Cocksucker. What else do we got? HE double hockey sticks, motherfucker. Okay, so we got some good ones here. And if you want to keep them coming throughout the presentation, absolutely, bitch. Another classic. Feel free to keep putting those in there. We love profanity here. Pissed off, yes. Bish. All of these can definitely be considered curse words or different types of profanity. And so thank you. F-bombs all day long. Yes. So I just didn't want to be the first one to either type or say the bad word today. So thank you all for that little icebreaker here. So one of the things I want to get started with is, why do I talk about this? Oh, and someone in the chat says, I've never heard of see you next Tuesday. So that one, that's actually one of those words I personally don't like, but C-U-N-T, if we put that one together, that's the see you next Tuesday joke. So, yep. So there's lots of good curse words out there too. And some of them we might not even necessarily think of as curse words. But we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that later. But I want to start by talking about why I kind of find this like my topic that I like to discuss, and why I kind of put myself out there as being the bad word lady. So we really don't think about, curse words and things like that until it either slips out of our mouth or we hear somebody else say it. And most of us, we grow up being told to watch your mouth, or that's a bad word. We don't say that. I know I was definitely one of those kids. I got told I had a smart mouth all the time, was told not to say those things, and that's okay. And there, of course, too, in life comes a time where it's more acceptable to curse. Usually when you're an adult, people don't really think twice as much about it. And usually the older you get, the more you talk about certain concepts as well that might be considered taboo if you hear a child say them. But there does really seem to be a common theme that many adults who use AAC, so adults with disabilities, complex communication needs, who use speech generating devices, a lot of adults have reported experiences where their language and their word choice is censored well into that stage of adulthood, where someone without disabilities or someone who doesn't use AAC, people aren't going to think twice if they said a bad word. And unfortunately, I've really seen this exact situation happen more times than I'd like in my career. And the first time that really stands out to me was I was a grad student and I was doing my clinical speech therapy work at a neuro rehab center. So I was working underneath a supervisor, and there was a client he was a man in his 40s. He had a traumatic brain injury since childhood. And he was just starting to use and test out a text-based app for communication. And so he would access this iPad device using a stylus. And because of his motor needs, it did take him a while to type out what he wanted to say. But that was his preference. He had literacy skills, and that's what he wanted to use and type himself. So the one thing that he really liked to say every day when we'd go in to meet with him, he would say, "I shit my pants." And he hadn't done that, but he just loved the reaction that he'd get. He liked the conversation around it. It was like his little catchphrase joke. He'd type that out, we'd have a good laugh, and then we'd move on and talk about a lot of other things. But it did take him a while to type that out. And then by the time that he had typed that one out, his session and our time together would almost be over, and we wouldn't really get to talk about other things. But that little catchphrase was really important to him. So I suggested that we just make it a pre-saved button on his communication device so that he could say it with one hit, and then we could talk about other things. And he loved that. He thought that was a great idea, was super excited and thought it was hilarious. And unfortunately, at the time, my supervisor did not find it as hilarious. And the next day when we went to see him and he went to use the "I shit my pants" button, it said "I pooped my pants." And the look on this man's face, he was so angry and rightfully so. And the supervisor said that it was too inappropriate for him. And that this message, "I pooped my pants," was better for him to say. Well, let's just kind of say that that did not go over very well with him. I mean, this gentleman was at the time old enough to be my and my supervisor's father. And here, in a way, we were policing his language and telling him what he can and cannot say. And this was kind of that instance that I was like, this isn't right. And I kind of decided that this was going to be my little, they say hill to die on, that if someone wants to access a curse word on their AAC, then they should have it. My job as a speech therapist is to support someone in saying what they want to say, not deciding what someone can or cannot say. And sure, I can make a suggestion like, hey, probably not a good idea to say that right now, but I shouldn't be controlling what words someone has access to, especially when someone is an adult. I'm not in the business of removing or censoring words from someone, again, especially a grown adult's vocabulary. And I'm going to say it a lot. Word choice is a personal choice, and there's going to be consequences sometimes to those choices. And so that's something that we as people have the right to do and also experience even negative consequences from our actions. So why should you talk about this topic? So when it comes to taboo language and concepts, there's going to be a lot of different nuances and also some different contributing factors like societal and personal beliefs around these types of concepts and words. And these beliefs are really going to help us decide what is taboo or what is profanity, so what's not okay and what is okay to talk about. But this is also, again, really going to depend on the person and their choice of words. Word choice is personal choice. I hope you will take that phrase with you today. But the ability to say what we want without someone else deciding for us is a very important and key part of human communication. And communication is a human right. We all have that right to express ourselves. That doesn't mean that there aren't, again, sometimes those consequences to the things that we say, but as a person, we should still be able to say them. But then what if someone took those words out of your vocabulary, or if you didn't have them in the first place? And this is a reality for many people with complex communication needs who use AAC speech generating devices. Their word choice can really be dependent on whether it's available on their device or their system. And if it's not there, then getting access to that is often going to be, one, dependent on if they program their own device and they have the time to add that vocabulary to their device. Two, if they have the literacy and the spelling abilities to meet those needs or meet their own needs. And then three, if they have a support person willing to help them. And let's say that that support person, like in the story of my supervisor, let's say that they don't think that what this person wants to say is appropriate. Then there's a good chance that that word or that sentence isn't going to be on the device. Or worse, it was on the device, but someone other than the person using the AAC device decides, oh, well, that shouldn't be there. I had a conversation with a mom a couple of weeks ago, and she was a fierce advocate for her child and a great mom. And AAC was something new to them. And she came to me after her son was trialing the device and said, oh, well, I saw the word hate was on here, and we don't use that word in our family. So can we take that off? And I kind of had that conversation with her that, well, he's 16. And you know, that is a word that is pretty common to say, and maybe he should have access to that. What if somebody uses that word to him and he would like to repeat what they said and, you know, to report or tell somebody? And of course, you know, using that word is a decision that is important in your family, and you would have that conversation with a child who would be using their voice to speak. So this is a conversation that you can have with your son who's using AAC. We can't remove a word from somebody's vocabulary when they're a speaking person. So why should we remove a word from someone's vocabulary who uses AAC just because we can? And the mom she really thought about that, and she decided to end up leaving that word on the device and actually giving him access to other words that most 16-year-olds are going to say. And then was able to have that conversation with her child about these types of words and when we use them and why we don't use them. So she didn't deny him that experience of growing up. We all get in trouble for our language at some point growing up. And so that was an experience that he should have been able to have with his parent. Also, the use and knowledge of profanity and taboo concepts is a part of normal cognitive and sociocultural development. Profanity and swearing and talking about these taboo things, it's a social skill. Just like for that 16-year-old, that's a skill that he has the right to develop and learn about. Sometimes we learn the hard way, and that's okay. But swearing and taboo conversations, they really do serve a variety of functional purposes, and they also contribute to our overall communicative competence. And this is something that's going to develop and it's going to change over time and across the lifespan. And profanity and taboos, they are a normal part of human language and communication, whether we choose to use them or not. They're going to be there. So defining some terms, I've been throwing a lot of these terms around so far, but I want to break them down just so that we can kind of be a little bit more on the same page moving forward. So taboos are a topic or a concept that are going to be considered socially unacceptable by a particular group, people, community, or a culture. I'm mostly using this as more of an umbrella term throughout the presentation. Taboos don't necessarily have to be swear words. They can be topics that are usually just not appropriate in conversation. So for example, like talking about sex or talking about going to the bathroom in a lot of detail. And what is considered taboo is really going to vary from culture to culture. Profanity, for our purposes here today, is really going to be any language that we would typically consider taboo. And in this case, it may or may not be what the majority of folks would consider a curse word or a swear word. I would say that these are more direct words, but I can also talk about a taboo, and it can still be taboo without using any type of profanity. Next up is swearing and cursing. These are going to be using an offensive or taboo word. I tend to use these ones for our purposes a little more interchangeably, but researchers, there's a difference between a swear and a curse word, but for our purposes, they're just going to be the same thing today. And these are going to be, we would always consider these a form of profanity, and these are going to be the usual 4-letter words in English, and typically words that they're going to be censored or beeped out on television. Expletives now are technically exclamations or interjections, and then those may or may not be a swear or a curse word. So if I drop something and I say, oh, damn it, that's going to be an expletive. So I'm interjecting, I'm exclaiming something, and it's also a swear word because it has the word damn in it. But then if I say maybe, oh, shucks, most people aren't really going to consider that one a swear or a curse word, but it might be an expletive depending on how I use it. But two, it might also be a curse word depending on the, the family, the society or the community that a person's in. So again, these are really going to be changing depending on who's using these words and in what context. And then lastly, we have slang. And so this is going to be informal language that's going to be used by a particular group of people. So sometimes these words and phrases are considered taboo. They might be profanity, but sometimes they're not. And what's considered slang is often less stable than typical swears or curses, meaning that slang tends to shift and change more often than traditional swears and curse words. Those tend to stay the same throughout generations, whereas slang is going to shift and change a little bit. And we typically consider the slang words trendy or what the kids are saying these days. But the major takeaway here is really that I'm going to be using a lot of these words interchangeably. A lot of these definitions have many overlapping features, but it's just a good idea to kind of go over these and keep these definitions in mind as we get more into the depth of today's presentation. So some additional disclaimers about profanity before we kind of take a look at the development of how profanity goes. I do want to say that the research in this area is extremely limited, and what little research there is mostly going to be based on mainstream American English. It's also important to keep in mind too that there are going to be those discrepancies about what's taboo and what is profanity. I'm going to probably say that a lot because that's a big thing that also influences the research too. Again, things are going to vary from culture to culture, community to community, and from person to person. But as we move forward with this information, it's also necessary to mention that the use of taboo language and whether or not a person wants to participate in talking about certain topics is, again, that personal choice. And not everyone is going to have the same feelings about certain topics. And some of these words and topics are going to be taboo, but in some situations, but acceptable in others. So for example, I'm going to talk about maybe sexual anatomy. I'm going to talk about my sexual health with my doctor. That's not necessarily going to be considered taboo in that concept. But if I'm going into, a lot of detail with my neighbor about it, that's probably going to be considered extremely taboo, like what the heck is going on? And there, of course, are going to be differences in the levels of offensiveness. And this can really depend on the context, how it's being used, or even the relationship between the listener and the speaker. Again, think about it. If I'm talking about sexual health with my doctor or my partner, that's not necessarily going to be considered taboo. That's just going to be a typical kind of conversation about those things. But talking to the neighbor or the random person at the grocery store, that people are going to think twice about that one. It's going to seem a little strange. And then last two, this is more of kind of like a fun fact, but there are some languages that don't have swear or curse words at all. Most languages are going to have a way to articulate profanity type concepts, but it's not necessarily going to look the same as it is in English. So sometimes, like if we think about it, like what we consider the F word in English might not have a direct translation in another language, or the equivalent of that translation is going to have a completely different meaning. It's not going to relate to what or mean what it does in English. So that's just kind of a fun fact about language and about profanity. So profanity regulation, freedom of speech, we know is a very important right, but freedom of speech also doesn't necessarily equal freedom from consequence. So there's going to be certain things that you can say, but it doesn't mean that there's not going to be consequences for those things. And sometimes those consequences are legal. Profanity has historically been regulated in the United States. Most people would agree that something like a direct threat on another person's life is going to be a just reason for regulation. It's like the idea of you probably shouldn't yell fire in a crowded room. While that's not necessarily a curse word or something, super bad to say, saying the word fire in a crowded room is going to cause a panic and someone could get hurt and there could be consequences to that type of action, especially if there isn't a fire. But then in terms of profanity regulation, we often think that there's like that list of words that get censored and that beeped out on TV. And yes, there are words that do get beeped out. There isn't actually like a straightforward designated list of banned words. In the United States, the FCC, or the Federal Communication Commission, regulates what they call obscene, indecent, and profane broadcasts. And so this is really determined, or this really determines if language meets one of these categories. So that's kind of what the FCC does if someone complains. So obscene content is actually not protected by the First Amendment in the United States. But there can really be a lot of gray area on what is considered to be obscene. There's been a lot of Supreme Court cases about it, but the big thing that the Supreme Court has said in the past is that for content to be considered obscene, it needs to, quote, lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Indecent content then, however, refers to sexual anatomy or acts that are going to be considered offensive, but not necessarily obscenity. And then profane content is going to be anything that is grossly offensive or a public nuisance. But then grossly offensive and offensive in general are going to be extremely subjective. And that issue has, again, it's resulted in a lot of different Supreme Court cases or just local court cases as well, too. But then as well, over the course of time, societal perspectives also, they do continue to shift on what we consider profanity. So if you think about it, if we were, thinking about TV 10, 20 years ago, what was censored on television then during normal broadcasting hours might no longer be beeped out on TV. It also depends on maybe the channel that you're on. And of course, more what we consider profanity is going to be allowed after those typical broadcasting hours. But society's expectations and acceptance of things changes. And then that also means that our language is going to change over time as well. So what makes a bad word? There's lots of factors that the researchers say contribute to making something a, quote, bad word, but these factors are really also going to depend on what the language is. In English, for example, there are thoughts that it might have to do with the number of syllables in a word or the types of sounds that make it a curse word. But then a lot of English swear words are not, they don't fit that criteria. We saw some of those in the chat when you guys were giving me the best, your best bad word. Some of those weren't just one word, they were multiple words as well. But again, we're going to kind of focus less on like the fancy science of sound behind curse words and more on the societal aspects of what makes something bad. So to start off, our society and our culture is really going to set that expectation for what is considered socially appropriate. Again, there's going to be those varying rates of offensiveness, appropriateness, and then it's also going to then too depend on the context and the meaning of the word. So it can also too be based on the age of the speaker or the listener. So if as an adult, if I say fuck in front of another group of adults, people aren't really going to think twice about it too much. But if you're saying that in front of a bunch of children, that's going to be considered highly inappropriate. Probably shouldn't have done that. But then if I hear a small child say that too, you're going to think twice and be like, why is that kid saying, the F word? Like, what's going on there? But again, we're not going to think too much about it when we hear other adults say it, unless it's like in, a different environment where you're like, what is going on? Probably shouldn't be saying that. But if you're at the bar or maybe with close friends or family, not going to think twice in most cases. But as adults too, we have knowledge about what this word means. So the word fuck has roots in sex acts, and that's what contributes to it being considered a taboo in our society. But a young child, they're not going to have that knowledge yet. They might know that it's a bad word based on, older children are using it, teens and adults are using it, but they're also getting that feedback from the reaction of other people when they say that word, especially when they're a little one. And that's going to clue them in really quickly that this is something that I shouldn't say, or that, oh, this is funny. This is a funny word, because they get that reaction. But they don't know what it means in most cases. As a young child, that's something that you grow into throughout your lifetime, is understanding more of that context behind these words. So some of the big names in research are Kristen J. and Timothy J. And they conducted this one study that really looked into the perception of words as bad. And they found that this is going to change throughout the lifetime. So words like asshole and shit and bitch, those were rated as bad by 98% of participants, both children and adults. But then words like fart and suck, they were rated as bad by children, but not by adults. Then this one's interesting. The word balls was rated as bad by young children, but older children and adults did not rate that one as a bad word. And we think about it, well, why is that? And in that case, the older children and adults were adding that sexual undertone to the word, because they have knowledge that this word has that double meaning. It's not just for basketballs, but it's also referring to, sexual anatomy. But young children, they don't have that concept in most cases that this word has a double meaning, that it also has a sexual connotation to it. They just think of it as something to play with or something we use during sports time. Another thing too about the research and what makes words bad is that there are typically 4 groups of profanity that we tend to see across languages. And the profanity tends to fall in either being religious in nature, referring to sexual anatomy and acts, referring to bodily functions, and then usually what we think of as slurs. So words that are derogatory to another person based on their identity or belonging to a group. So those are kind of some of the things that make up bad words. And so why do we use profanity? Like, why say a bad word? Like, what's the point of even having them? Well, profanity does have a lot of uses, whether we like it or not. These words can really be used to help us express negative feelings. We use them to react to pain. In fact, it's been shown that if you're swearing when you're in pain, it's actually going to make you feel a little bit better. It's going to reduce some of that pain. We also do it to gain, attention, or it's an element of some of our humor. And we also use it to relate to peers and for social reasons too. We're typically going to use profanity or taboo language around people that we have a high level of comfort with. And kids are going to learn from other kids, and they're going to learn more about language from other children than they do from adults in most cases. And so they might start to swear and curse with their friends. As a parent too, you might think your kid doesn't know any types of profanity, but they actually might have quite an extensive vocabulary, but they're only using it with their friends. And some of us too, we don't, we think things like farts and poop and sex, we make jokes about those. We think it's funny. Some of us grow out of that. Some of us don't, and we still get a kick out of those bad words. But we also don't use profanity for just fun and games and jokes and to, make other people laugh. We can use them to hurt people. And words like slurs, we know can do a lot of damage. We can also use profanity to emphasize something. And, for some of us, it is a casual conversation habit. It's definitely a conversation habit for me, unfortunately. So cursing is really common. Swear words are a part of everyday conversation. And the research shows that it's definitely more common than many of us would like to admit. There's this really interesting study from 2003 by Mel and Penny Baker, and they were studying or reviewing different graduate students in their language, or undergraduate students in their language from the University of Texas at Austin. So they recorded these students in their typical everyday speech environments. The students, had a device, they walked around, and it just captured, everyday college student type conversations during college student type activities. And then the data showed that the students, what they said really consisted of high frequency words, things like articles, prepositions, verbs, words to describe emotions. And so like when I look at this data set, I see a lot of what in the AAC world we refer to as core vocabulary. So those high frequency words that we really encourage people to have in their communication systems and on their communication devices, that these are going to be some of those big important words that we use in helping support somebody with complex communication needs. And for example, one thing that we consider core vocabulary in a lot of cases is our first person plural pronouns. So words like we, us, and our. And in this data set of these college students, we, us, and our only made up 1% of the total data. And then coming up next, right behind them for, the top words used, swear words were right behind those pronouns, and they made up 0.5%. Now that doesn't seem like a lot of, a number there, but these words showed up enough times to make it into their own category in the analysis, just like those first person pronouns did at 1%. And when we look at this data set too, there was a couple of participants that they used swear words more than they used these types of pronouns in their everyday speech. So there's also another study that estimates that swear words might be, like the use of them might be closer to 0.7% or even closer to 1% of our speech on a daily basis. But none of us are really going to consider those types of pronouns, we, us, and our. We're going to think of those as important words that we need to be able to say and that an AAC user should have on their device. But statistically, they're not that much more significant in the data of everyday speech than our swear words are. So typically the average speaker says about 15 to 16,000 words each day. And so that then means that about 80 to 90 of those are going to be under that taboo word umbrella. And then again, back to it, we don't view in the AAC world and in the education world as pronouns as low frequency words, but statistically they really are. And I like to think that this kind of gives us that, that evidence that we can shift our mindset about this, and giving people access in terms of their AAC devices and advocating for them to have other words too that may or may not, be as high frequency when they actually, in fact, are pretty high frequency. So again, I'm not really, saying that curse words are more important than these other types of words, but it's just something to kind of add evidence to that argument and to start thinking about adding these types of words and, advocating for them for someone who wants to use them. So how do children learn bad words? I mentioned this already a little bit, but learning profanity and taboo language and those types of concepts, they're going to be a normal part of our development. Children, they're going to learn those bad words. They're going to learn those taboo concepts, and also the etiquette of using them and talking about them, whether or not they use these types of words, this type of language themselves. They're still going to know, oh, little Sally over there, that was a bad word she said, or they're going to, know not to do this, not to say this, not to talk about this, whether they do or not. And even if parents don't swear around their children or they don't talk about sex at all, in many cases, kids are going to learn this stuff from their peers. That's also something too to think about, that sometimes, especially learning from other peers who might have incorrect information, that then, that child's going to learn the information incorrectly as well. So like a example, I'm an only child, so I didn't have that older sibling to, tell me, the bad words, or to say those kinds of things in front of me. And I would say that my parents were pretty good at not swearing in front of me as a child. I think my first curse word was, "This water is too damn cold." And I learned that one from my grandfather because he did not filter his language around me as a child as much as he probably thought he did. But I remember being in about 4th grade, and I knew that there was this thing called the F word, but I didn't know what it was. I just knew the F word, the worst word you could ever say. And I remember, again, 4th-ish grade, about 2 of my friends were talking about the F word, and they were teasing me about not knowing it. And they did tell me, though, after me begging to know what it was, that it rhymed with truck. So there I was for probably a couple years until like middle school, thinking that the F word was fruck, F-R-U-C-K. So that was really nice for me because I found out it was not fruck. And that was pretty embarrassing. So there, my parents did not say that word around me until I was an adult. And yet I still learned what it was eventually. So that's something too to keep in mind. We might think someone doesn't know about these concepts for whatever reason, but there's a pretty good chance that they actually really do. So swearing in typical language development, that most children start to swear or use these words around 2 years old. And at this age, most children are really just repeating things that they've heard. There does tend to be a drop off in swear words and then more of an increase in what we kind of refer to as like potty talk, in young children. And then by 5, we see that potty talk kind of then, start to taper off a little bit, but then children have a pretty advanced vocabulary of bad words, about 30 to 40 bad words by the time they're school age and entering the school system. The research kind of shows that younger children, they're going to use more mild words. And then the older they get, you start to enter, adolescence, you become an adult, then you're going to start using more of those stronger curse words more frequently. Usually by the age of 11 to 12, swearing is pretty much going to be adult-like. And I'm going to talk more about applications to AAC in a little bit. But I do want to point out that based on this kind of evidence that it does suggest that AAC users should definitely have access to this type of vocabulary by the age of 11 or 12, if not earlier. So then here on the next slide is the top taboo words for children of different ages. So these words here are based in the order of frequency. So the first word here, like if we look at 1 to 2 year olds, that the most frequently used bad word is poop or poopy, like a variation of that. Under this type or this data set, the article did include 9 to 10 year olds as well, but that age group, for whatever reason, really liked to use slurs. And so that's where I implemented a personal boundary of not having the 9 to 10 year olds displayed as an age group on this chart, just because I didn't want those words displayed here. But if you're interested in seeing that, the article is called A Child's Garden of Curses. And excluding the 9 and 10 year olds did not change the data set at all. Most of the words were also pretty similar. They just had several identity slurs listed there too. But in terms of AAC, I might look at this kind of list and say, okay, well, these are some words that might be important to a young child. Little ones, most of us, especially if you're a parent or a grandparent or you work with little children, you might be familiar with kids like to talk about poop and they like to talk about butts. And so that might be a good place to introduce some of that vocabulary for a child that might be using an AAC system so that they can also have that experience to talk about those things. And it's also highly motivating. Kids love that topic. So that's something to consider. Might not necessarily advocate for having bitch on a 2-year-old's device, because in this case too, if we think back about the development of profanity, in these cases, children are really just repeating these types of words. So like fuck and bitch, they're repeating that from maybe one of their parents saying it. They don't know what that means. They're not using that in the context. They're just repeating it for that effect. Whereas a lot of times little kids, once they start developing language, they know what poop is, most likely from, diaper routines, those type of parents talking about that with them, that they made a mess, those types of things. So that's a word that's very relevant to their life, but we might actually think that that's really taboo to talk about. Why would we give a child this access? But they're also hearing it probably a lot more frequently throughout the day than we really think about. So now if we look at the top words throughout the lifespan, so this is kind of comparing all children here compared to adults. And you're also going to see it's the same thing too, that the word listed first is the most frequent word, and then going down the list. So this was kind of summarizing all of the children, including the 9 and 10-year-olds. None of the words here, me excluding the 9 and 10-year-olds from that other list does not influence this chart at all within the data too, but you're going to see that there's actually a lot of overlap between children and adults here. So again, that's just kind of some food for thought, something to think about in terms of, providing access or not removing these words from an existing AAC system, just something to think about. So a little bit about slang. This is something that we actually really see that a lot of AAC users unfortunately don't have access to. And slang, it can be words, it's going to be phrases, it can even be grammatical structures that are specific to different groups. And what makes slang special is that it has a shared understanding within a group, and that it's really used to include or exclude people from that group. I think I mentioned it earlier that it's what the cool kids are saying these days. And we really use slang to establish a level of formalness in conversation. So typically, at work or in a professional setting, we're not going to use slang types of words and phrases, but we might when we're at home or, we're talking to friends or close family members. It's also something that really shows up in a lot of humor, in comedy, things like that too. And slang, it can also be trendy. So it can be really short-lived, but then it can also become a permanent word in a language. So like one example would be like to friend or unfriend somebody. That type of slang really derived from, using it to friend someone in Facebook. And that slang was exclusive to Facebook, but now it's kind of become more of a typical word. Most people have that kind of understanding of what that means, that you use it online in a form of social media, whether, we don't, in some other areas, we don't necessarily friend somebody, but we might use that word to talk about something similar or to describe that type of level. Now, there's other words too that, we also see by the time I learn the word and I use it with a teenage client of mine, it's not cool anymore. They don't want to hear that. They think, ew, don't say, that's gross. Don't use that word. That would be like me trying to say, something's on fleek, or what's the tea? They don't want to hear that anymore. That's not cute when I do it. But too, one thing that's really interesting about slang as well and where it comes from is that a lot of these words and phrases do originate from speakers of non-mainstream American English and different diverse communities, such as the LGBTQIA+ community. A lot of slang that we see that's really popular today comes from that community, as well as Black and African American communities too. So here on this slide, I just have a couple examples. They're probably not cool anymore, and kids would probably make fun of me for saying them, but words like tea, so what's the tea? Asking them to tell you what's going on or what's the truth. Sus, so short for suspicious. Goat, the greatest of all time. And then Luke, like, your style, or like, I did a makeup Luke today. So these are just some quick little examples. And I actually pulled these symbols to look more like emojis. That's something too that I like to use in a lot of symbol representation. A lot of folks are familiar with emojis. It's pretty mainstream and common. And these can really be a good way to represent some of these more slang-like topics when you're putting them in an AAC system or device. Another thing too is that memes can be another good symbol, especially for slang phrases or to represent something more like an inside joke. And I think I do have some slides later about different types of symbol, like alternate symbol representation. And in the chat, someone suggested Bitmojis work great too. Absolutely, those are a really good one as well to represent, you know, some of those like slang type phrases and things like that that kids are really using. I think too, making sure that someone has access to the slang, this is really important, especially for teenagers and young adults, so that they can participate in conversations and in, you know, social media type interactions with their peers. This is something that's really, you know, important to include. And this isn't going to come just, you know, already programmed onto a device. This is something that needs to be, you know, added, you know, purposefully to somebody's system. And it can be a real game changer when somebody finally has, you know, these different phrases. Another thing too that's typically considered taboo is really talking about sex and sexuality and sex education. It is a pretty hot topic and it's pretty controversial right now. But I do want to talk about this because I think it is important. There are some norms for typical development of sexual concept knowledge. And we're going to look at some of those on the next slide. But there is a typical pattern for development or understanding and learning about sexual health. Then the adults in a child's life are really going to have a huge impact on this. Adults' knowledge and their competencies, as well as their willingness to teach and expose children to this type of information, is going to have that significant influence on what that child learns. And we know that given a lot of these controversies around sexual education in schools, that children of all abilities are not receiving equal or appropriate age-appropriate information. And then children with disabilities are learning even less if they're exposed to it at all. Personally, I would say that my sex education in school was pretty lacking, but I will never forget this one instance. I went back to shadow a speech therapist at my high school when I was in college to get some of my hours for speech therapy work. And I got to sit in on one of the life skills kids' health classes. And they were learning about reproduction at the time. And I will never forget this one student read something along the lines of, quote, "sperm and egg collide." And then that was it. That was the sex ed for these students. And these were 17 and 18-year-olds with differing supports needs, but they all had disabilities. And they got no explanations, nothing else, just that one line, that one day. And so I think now too that they're adults now, and some of that like the fact that they didn't receive that information is pretty concerning. That they might not be able to have an understanding of these different acts, and if you don't have an understanding of these, how can you report when something is wrong? So too, here on this slide are some examples of different concepts that children will typically have by a certain age. So the website listed here at the bottom of the slide does provide a very comprehensive list of sexual health development information across the lifespan. And it also has some detailed information for the different age groups beyond the one that I have listed here on the slide. So I just pulled some examples here just to give you a basic idea. So by 2 to 3 years old, children, we expect them to be able to recognize those differences in anatomy, and they're also usually able to identify and label body parts. Advocates and researchers in this area of child development have really recommended too that by this age, children should have been introduced to the proper names of body parts. And this is something that can be easily introduced during everyday routines to children with and without disabilities. So for example, like a diaper change type of routine or a bath or a shower type of routine, these types of words can really be modeled and introduced. And this is important because then it also helps children to be able to know their body parts and be able to report that. There is a story that I heard of a child using the word, a female child, using the word cookie to refer to her genitalia, and she didn't have another word, and she told a teacher that, this person kissed her cookie, and the teacher didn't think twice about it. She just thought it was something silly. And then there was a case of this child being a victim of sexual abuse, and someone said something. A parent might have used the word cookie then to refer to this body part, and the teacher then realized that this child had been saying that something was going on, but she didn't know that this word was referring to this child's body parts. So that is an example of how it can be really important for children to, of course, you can use nicknames and family names for words at home too, but children should also have access to and learn the proper names in the case of needing to talk about these, especially in the case of reporting abuse. And children without disabilities aren't necessarily getting this information, and that unfortunately also means that children with disabilities are getting this information even less. Then usually between ages of 3 to 5, we start to see, children understand gender differences. They're starting to develop who they are, but they also enjoy using things like bodily function humor. They like talking about those poop and those fart jokes. That's a classic 3 to 5-year-old humor. And then too, we're going to start seeing by ages 5 to 6 that children are going to start to view sexual vocabulary words as bad words. They're going to start to feel embarrassed about their bodies, and they're also going to develop a better understanding of appropriate and inappropriate behavior. And this is really when that cultural and societal influences about taboo topics are really going to come into play. We also too then see by 7 to 9 years old that the majority of children, if they have not already started to have bad feelings and bad understanding of sexual body parts, they're going to know that talking about those things are bad, and we don't talk about them definitely by 7 to 9 years old. So again, think about it for a second. If children and teenagers, without disabilities are receiving an inadequate education in this area, what's going on with the children with disabilities? They're probably receiving even less. And we do know that it is a reality that individuals with disabilities are going to be more likely at victims of abuse. So without these words and without this knowledge and vocabulary, how are they going to be able to talk about their bodies, and how are they going to be able to report that abuse if something is wrong? So children with and adults with complex communication needs really need to have exposure to these concepts and the opportunity to learn about them. But even when they do have that knowledge, they might not have the vocabulary on their system to talk about these concepts, and that is a huge problem in addition. So we're going to look a little bit more in depth about the application of this information to AAC. So why is this important for AAC? Who cares about bad words? We don't need those. They're not important. And I think I've already mentioned a few reasons as to why these are important. It's a normal part of human development and human language. We don't stop the development and the access to these words and concepts throughout our lifetime. So why should we be stopping them for people with disabilities or for someone who needs assistance with programming their AAC device? Many AAC users are often going to have limited or no access to the vocabulary that they need to talk about these types of taboo topics. There's one study that interviewed adults who used AAC devices, and there was one woman who reported that she wanted to have intimacy with her boyfriend, and she used a symbol-based system, but she didn't have the access to the vocabulary that she needed to talk about to tell her partner what she wanted to consent to and what she didn't want to do. But then she also didn't at the time have the literacy skills to convey that information either in another way. And so without those literacy skills, she didn't really have a way to even request a support person or a family member to add that vocabulary with symbols to her device. She didn't have a way to talk about it. She just had to wait for someone else to bring it up to her first. And so think about that for a second. This is an adult in a consenting relationship, and she did not have a way to appropriately talk about her intimacy with a consensual partner. And now again, think about that if it wasn't talking about, something, exciting with another adult partner. What if it was that she needed to report an assault or some sort of abuse? She didn't have those words or that vocabulary to do so. But two, we need this vocabulary on these devices to be able to talk about these things in positive and in negative situations. And two, if a person also doesn't have, exposure or the opportunity to learn about profanity and related vocabulary, how are they going to know that they might be being abused? What if, for example, someone is using a slur against them? How are they going to be able to report that if they don't have the knowledge that this is not okay for me to be called or referred to, and this is abuse? Or how would they report it if they're not able to then, repeat that or share that information with someone else? So the research says that people with physical and severe speech disabilities are unfortunately more likely to experience abuse. A 2003 study showed that 45% of a group of 40 participating adult AAC users reported experiencing crime or abuse, and only 28% of these individuals reported to police. The Speak Up Project interviewed adult AAC users as well, and 73 to 88% of the participants reported that they had, quote, no means to communicate about healthy sexuality and related topics. I believe it was from this study, this project, but I'm not 100% sure. It was in one of the research articles that they reported. A participant shared that he had watched something on the news and saw that they were talking about people with blood transfusions receiving, getting HIV from blood transfusions. I don't know if this was a local situation, I'm not sure, but then he had concerns because he had a complex medical history and had received a lot of blood transfusions throughout his lifetime. And this was something he wanted to bring up to his doctor to talk about, if this is something he should be concerned about. And he realized that he did not have any of those types of words, especially, to talk about HIV or even just blood transfusions in general in his system. And so that was a big thing for him. I believe that this man had alternative means to be able to communicate about this, like the literacy skills to kind of find another way, but he didn't have this information already in his system as an adult. And this was something that was very concerning to him and stood out enough that he reported it during this research conversation. So let's see our implications. So there's lots of implications. I feel like I've probably already mentioned a lot of them too, but I think the big takeaway here is that really AAC users should have access to the same vocabulary that their age-matched speaking peers have. There's this idea of a person having a dictionary in their brain. We call it the lexicon. And as we age, this is going to get bigger and bigger with the more words that we're using being added all the time. Our knowledge and understanding of things expands throughout the lifetime. And then, of course, so does our vocabulary to talk about those things that we now have understanding of. And so we have all of these words. And if you're a speaking person, you have the ability to speak them if you choose to. Maybe you don't choose to speak some of them. That's okay. So AAC users not only have this lexicon in their brain of all of their word knowledge, but they also need that physical lexicon too. They need these words on their physical communication device or in their communication system. So both of these need to match to the best of their ability. Of course, there's logistical issues. It's not going to be perfect, but one of those issues shouldn't be coming from a support person or a professional that's working with the individual with disabilities saying, you can't have that word because it offends me. And this is especially true for teenagers and adults, that their language is being policed and censored before they even say it. And access and use are two completely different things. Access to an extended vocabulary, including profanity and taboo and slang. These are important for self-expression and for identity. And these words can also be empowering, and they're a personal, important decision that a person can make. And remember, again, they're saying this again and again and again, word choice is a personal choice, and we shouldn't be taking that away from someone just because we can. If an adult is not allowed to have the word shit on their communication device and is only giving access to poop, that's not respecting that adult's autonomy or respecting the fact that they are an adult and that they're able to make those personal decisions. AAC users have both, they have both of those words. They have poop and they have shit in their, brain lexicon. So they should have access to both of those words in their physical lexicon if they choose to have them. And there are also social benefits to having these words too. And with access to this type of vocabulary, it does lead to better outcomes for individuals to be able to report their abuse or other instances and get the help and support that they need. So I've definitely mentioned some of these barriers that exist for AAC users and their access to explicit vocabulary already. But here on the slide, I just have some listed that, that I've run into myself as a speech language pathologist. But then some of these are also, brought to my attention by some adult AAC users. At TechOwl, we run a group called AAC Community. And especially at the beginning of the pandemic, we were doing Zoom meetups quite frequently. And so this ended up being like a big topic that a lot of our participants would share when we were talking about different things and adult topics. So first off, that there's a lot of limitations in access to vocabulary available in already existing systems. I would say that it's getting better. We're definitely going to take a look at some of those in the next couple of minutes. So the vocabulary available in some systems, but of course, companies and vendors can do better with providing access to this in a lot easier of ways. Another huge issue that I've seen, and that's also been reported to me by AAC users, is that, supports people or family members, teachers, therapists, direct service providers, any type of caregiver, if they're the person that programs the device on behalf of the AAC user, they might censor the language that's available. And this could be for a variety of reasons. It could be, a personal bias or a prejudice or even ableism, but it could also just be due to a misconception, something like ableism or infantilizing people with disabilities. Maybe the caregiver is not presuming the person's competence or their ability to learn. They might also be censoring that person's language by replacing terms with those, quote, more appropriate alternatives. And of course, very young children, they're not going to have, extremely explicit sexual content on their device. But if this is something that their speaking peers as they age are, once they start aging, they're starting to communicate about those things, we might need to start replacing those certain words and have them grow throughout the lifetime too. Other reasons that a device might be censored is due to limited knowledge. For example, maybe a parent doesn't know what that trendy slang is for the teens. And then, of course, there's just not updating vocabulary, again, like through the lifespan, and that can be problematic. So, the words for preschooler, like a good curse word if you're 3 might be poopy head, but that's not going to cut it when you're 15 and you need to tell somebody off. And it's the same thing like with slang. If I'm going to say the word YOLO, that might have been cool 10 years ago, but it's probably not going to cut it now. The teenagers are going to think that, I'm not cool. They're going to make fun of me, especially if I'm a teenager myself and I'm using outdated slang. Kids are going to, be disappointed. They're going to know that somebody else put these words on there for them, which, yes, of course, sometimes that we can't avoid that. but we should try our best to stay up to date with some of this information. And another limitation is that the current AAC teaching strategies for children and emergent communicators and other individuals tend to be really limited. So for example, if someone is using a smaller grid size, there are many words that are going to be of a lot more importance and take priority over forms of profanity. But, you know, maybe we change the way that we're thinking, and we have some fun words available, maybe in light tech, or we have it in like a picture communication board or a book, or maybe we have a special page set just for that potty talk to introduce to a young child. Like, for example, I worked with a little guy that they didn't show any interest in their device. They didn't want to talk about what they wanted. They didn't want to request things. And the initial thought was, you know, that maybe this larger grid size was too much for them. But one day, I don't really know why, but somehow farts or potty talk, something like that came up. And then all of a sudden this child was engaging and laughing. And so we changed some of their words and we added poop and fart to the talker. And now all of a sudden this preschooler is cracking jokes, requesting the bathroom, and experiencing engaging and meaningful communication with others. And, you know, farts are funny, especially when you're 4. So why not add those to the talker and see what happens? And see if that's more motivating than maybe requesting a snack or something else. So there's another study too that looked into adolescent AAC users, so between the ages of 10 to 19, and they were interviewed and they were asked different questions about their perspectives and their experiences. And a lot of the participants really did share that they had concerns about other people controlling their vocabulary. And some of these teenagers did have complex bodies and that they did rely on their parents or maybe their therapists to change the words in their communication device. But then, of course, a lot of them too felt like their systems were really heavily influenced by the adults in their lives. And that often meant that things that were important to them as a teenager and their identity as a teenager were really being censored. So if we look here from that same study, this looks at some of the words that were considered most important for adolescent AAC users. So things like fuck and shut up, piss off, stop, feck, I'm assuming that's a curse word. And then they wanted to talk about curse words. They wanted to say ha 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 and have, you know, slang and things like that. So these were words that they thought were really important that other AAC users should have access to. So we can't say that things that are inappropriate aren't in pretty high demand. I do too want to share this quote by Donnie T.C. Denome. Donnie is an AAC user, and they have written extensively about this topic from their perspective as an AAC user. And I highly recommend that you check out their blog and read the article, How Do You Symbolize Intimacy? For many AAC programs, not particularly well. This is a really good blog post about looking more in depth into some of these systems. But I do just want to say, read this quote because I do feel that it is an extremely powerful message. Age, disability, and the discomfort of others are not reasons to deny someone the vocabulary they desperately need. So this slide here includes some different strategies to support access to extended vocabulary. So this is by no means the only strategies that are available, but this can be kind of a way to start shifting the mindset around this conversation. So we want to make sure that we're providing access that the person's going to want to use. So if it is potty talk for a little one, so that's going to be engaging, that's going to be motivating, and that's going to also be frequently, you know, something that little guys talk about. And then teenagers and adults, they're going to need to have, access to more concepts for sexuality and their body parts. They're also going to need to be able to have access to those swear words, whether they choose to use them or not. Most likely they're hearing them. They might need to report that someone, said this about them or used this word against them. We also, of course, need those proper names of body parts. I can't stress that enough. That's, not just in the case of reporting abuse, but it's also important, especially for folks that have complex bodies, to be able to talk about their medical needs, to be able to discuss hygiene and self-care needs, to, be able to explain that someone might need to provide them support or care for them so that they can direct their own care. They can advocate for themselves in medical settings. These are all reasons why access to proper anatomy is very, very important. Also, terminology for gender identity and sexual orientation, as well as forming healthy sexual relationships, is also necessary for, as people enter adulthood. To be able to talk about these and explore those things if the person so chooses. And in the chat, it says, my friend set up, quote, naughty talk time with her daughter without a disability, but gave her 3 to 4-year-old a place to practice and knowing where she can say something or not in public. And I think that that's a great idea too for children with and without disabilities. It gives them the freedom to learn and explore. And also too gives them a safe space to do that where, other people aren't looking or they're not shouting out something in the middle of the store, or for a child who uses an AAC device, they're not hitting, the word fart, 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 fart over again, let's say in the middle of church or in the middle of the classroom, where it's probably not appropriate to be doing that. So those are definitely good times to practice and learn about those words. So wrong word, wrong time, learning swearing and taboo topic etiquette. It really is a social skill, and it's definitely an important one for sure. And this is something that support persons really shouldn't shy away from. People, regardless of ability, are really going to be exposed to profanity, and they're going to experience sexual health, and they're also going to experience using the wrong word at the wrong time. This happens. We've all probably had that experience ourselves, and we shouldn't be denying it from somebody with a disability. We don't just remove these words from a speaking person's vocabulary or from their brain. So why would we do that to somebody whose vocabulary happens to be on an iPod or an iPad or a communication device? It really is necessary to teach those proper places and proper times for these kinds of words in conversation. So again, child using their device to say fuck or farts in the middle of class, it's not going to be the time for that language. And using a device is not a free pass to avoid the consequences of shouting those spicy words at school. As an SLP, I used to, get that question, and I get this often too, is, well, what do we do when someone says the bad word or they're, talking about this in class? And my answer is, what would you do when another kid does the same thing? Most likely you're going to get sent to the principal. You're going to get in trouble. And that should be the same consequence for the person using the communication device. It's either the right time and place for it and it's fine, or you get weird looks and someone tells you that's not appropriate, or you offended them and they're angry with you, or you get told about it and now you're in trouble if you do it again. You should be able to experience those negative consequences, whether you have a disability or not. I mean, no one wants to get in trouble, but sometimes we have to learn about these things. In the chat, we have a question. Do you think school SLPs feel like they may get into trouble with the school district or with the parents if they try to add curse words to a child's device? I think that's a hard question to answer. I mean, personally, I know that I have added words to someone's device and I have gotten in trouble. I had a high schooler want those on their device and the parents didn't care, but it was more so of the teachers cared. And thought it was inappropriate. But this was also, there were other issues in that specific case too, of, you know, if the child was using, well, he was a teenager, if he was using the device and like, you know, saying fuck over and over again, that then they would just take the device away instead of, you know, saying you can't say that, you need, if you say it one more time, you know, you're going to go to the principals, which is the same thing that they would have said to one of the speaking peers in the class. But I really, I don't have a magic answer for this too. I mean, I personally feel like this is something that I would fight for and advocate for. If curse words are already available on a child's device, I'm not going to take them off. We might have, you know, a conversation about those words, but I'm a big believer in, my view isn't the censorship. But I also know that it is tricky when you're working in the school too. You know, you want to keep your job. You don't want to get in trouble and do things wrong. And I think that that's probably just more of a conversation to have too, especially if it can get built into the child's IEP as well, that they are working on learning, you know, about different types of vocabulary and words in certain social situations. That might be a way to kind of sneak that type of vocabulary and experience in there. I think it really just, and similar to employment situations and natural consequences, yes, I think that there is, you know, a time and a place for it. I think that it's also something too to really bring up with their teachers and with their family as well too, especially for children that are going to be graduating soon, to be able to discuss, well, they're going into the real world, what can we do to talk about these things? And maybe even showing some of the data that I talked about too can help show, well, their same age peers have access to this. You could use this as evidence to advocate for them in those situations as well. They have the right to learn. And I do think too that they are going to run into people in their lifetime too that are going to say those words to them, that are going to use words like that in an abusive way. We've all experienced something like that. And so maybe coming from the approach of not necessarily using it like you get to say this and curse at people, but you get to be able to talk about this and report about it too, is another approach that you might get more buy-in from administration type people for that. It's also, I like to think that it's one of those situations like know your audience. And sometimes, you know, if kids want it on there, we just sneak it. Sometimes we can sneak it in too. If it's their own device, it's their voice. I do like to think too that the school can't police another child's voice and pull the word out of their vocabulary. So why are we doing that here with this child just because we can?
And Haley, this is Laura.
Yeah.
And similar, I put the comment about the employment situation. I don't know if you have additional things to add or anything, but you know, I've experienced where maybe a job coach doesn't want that consumer to have the ability to inadvertently swear on the job or, you know, speak out when, say things they shouldn't when in an employment situation. Whereas, and it's similar, but, you know, then you may have there may be a guardian issue, yay or, you know, yes or no, as well as just, or even just from that employment advocacy. I just didn't know if you had anything else to add on that, but I've just had that situation because I have less experience in the school district, but where more in the employment world and adults having the right, you know, obviously if I say the F-bomb in a meeting or a presentation not on that topic, you know, I'm going to be looked down upon or get into trouble. And so helping people understand that, you know, they have to, if they have never had that access to that word, then they aren't going to learn that they shouldn't use it.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think that it's important. It's important as well. It's also important, I think, too, to have like the candid conversations about it and being like, you can't use these words. Like we're, you know, like let's add this, but you can't use it at work. And if you use it at work too, that's like a skill that somebody needs to learn, especially as an adult. Like, and I get too, if you've never had something, you're going to be really excited to be able to use these words. I gave a similar presentation like this and got an email from the mom of an adult AAC user. And he hadn't really even thought to have these words on his device, and he added them, and he made sure that in the email he said, I'm going to not use them at work. So it just, and I'm sure that, he might have a friend at work that he can use those with too, but I think it's also important about learning those types of situations and contexts, especially if somebody, if they're working with a job coach, that this is a good opportunity for the job coach to work with them as well on the type of language that we use in certain situations. I think sometimes too that we often, like as providers and caregivers, we like to set people up for success all the time. And of course we want to do that, but part of life is not being successful in everything. We're going to make mistakes, and we're going to have failures sometimes, and that's an important part of the human experience in using language and in learning throughout our lifetime. And so that's also a consideration. I think back to this was back to when I was a grad student too, working at that neuro rehab center. There was this one gentleman too that he just wanted to be able, we were setting him up with a device, and I asked him, what word do you want on there? And he flipped me off. And I said, okay, so you want the F word? And he like looked at me, and I was like, you like fuck off? And he nodded, and that's what he wanted on the device. And then I realized it was because the guy at his, across the hall at his room, and the guy that sat next to him in their, their work area, because of his brain injury, he didn't have like the filter. So he wasn't able to, censor his own language, and he loved to curse. And this other gentleman couldn't say anything back. And that was a really important thing, that he just really wanted to be able, this other guy was cursing at him all the time, and he just wanted to be able to do it back. And so I think of that situation, and in that employment situation too, the other gentleman wasn't bothering anybody. It was just something that he did. But this other guy wanted to be able to kind of join in and do it too. But no one in that case policed the man who was able to do it using his oral speech. It was just that now, because it's on a device, that we can control this other person's voice, that now it became a question and something that admin had to think about, which I just thought that was a really interesting situation. And like, the question is, well, why all of a sudden, because this man is using an AAC device, is, cursing in the workshop even a question? Because all of these men were cursing like a bunch of sailors and no one cared until the man with the device was able to do so too. So one thing that's I do want to touch on too is that about availability and access of this type of vocabulary on some of the existing systems. So a lot of the slides that I'm going to be showing is popular apps, and some of them have edits, some of them do not. And I'll talk about the ones that have any type of customization as well. In the chat, someone said, I worked with VAs and veterans across the country. A page of swear words was a frequent request. The AAC companies had a fun time thinking of words to add to those pages. Yes, absolutely. And I think things are getting a lot better too, as we'll see in the next couple slides. A lot of the AAC vendors are starting to have curse words and other types of taboo words built into the systems, rather than kind of an afterthought that you have to actively and purposefully add to a system. So this is my second content warning. The next few slides are going to contain that explicit, some explicit language written on the text, as well as there will be some explicit imagery. So these are all going to be symbol line drawings, but they are going to feature reproductive and sexual anatomy. So if that's something that you're not comfortable with, you can feel free to minimize your screen, or you can feel free, if you need to log off for this, you absolutely can. But if you are interested in seeing these types of pictures and the display of the devices, that they'll be on the next couple slides. Okay, so the first one I'm going to show is Touch Chat, and this is the multi-chat 15, the adult symbol set. So here you can see that these are just some of the ones that they have pre-programmed already. But one thing too that I think is interesting when we look at this is that some of the words are actually censored in here on the display. Of course, a person can go in and make any edits to this page. This can be completely customized, but just from a default, I downloaded it, I'm ready to use it mindset, this is what you get. So you have a-hole, BS, screw that, that's crap, darn, and what the ... So those are some of the curse words here with this page set. The next one is TD Snap. So TD Snap actually does have some pretty robust word lists and a topics page about sexuality. So you'll see here, this is all of the vocabulary that is built in to the system. This has no edits here as well. So it does cover some things like birth control, abuse, as well as like STDs. It even has like pornography on here too as well. And I also like that it has the words to talk about like, don't touch me, or that you don't like that, or I trust you. These are, you know, important words to help support somebody with their sexuality in an intimate relationship. So that's good to have on here as well. There's, again, more specific vocabulary too to talk about sexuality, which is, again, these are already built in to the system. But people can, of course, add customization, expand on this to meet their needs. Now, one thing with this too is, you know, I do mention, like in a lot of my work, I have recommended TD Snap to really young children. And I do definitely advocate for healthy, you know, age appropriate sexual health information too. But sometimes some of this might not be necessarily age appropriate in sexual development, the course for our younger AAC users. So this is something that, you know, we can use the research to help us look at and determine which words at which ages are going to be appropriate to have access to, as well as, you know, family, you know, the family standards, those kinds of things as well. But this information is available and ready to go for adults who need to be able to communicate about this topic more regularly than maybe our younger friends. So swearing, this was something that I had to add and customize to TD Snap, but it does pop up. If you start to program it in, it does have some of these symbols already embedded into the system. So this was just some of the ones that I quick added just to see if the symbols were available. So we have ass and damn, fuck, hell, shit, and jerk. Those were readily available to be able to create your own customized page within TD Snap for swearing. Next up is Proliquo to go. So back around January, when I did this presentation at ATIA, they had just announced a new update that included symbols for sexuality and gender related symbols. So this was a pretty like new feature within Proliquo. So you do have to do some specific programming to be able to access these symbols, but they are available now in like the default of Proliquo instead of having to like subscribe to a more expanded symbol set. So information on being able to set these types of symbols up in your device would be in this AssistiveWare support link, and then an article advocating for this and using these symbols by an AAC user. Again, this one is by Donnie as well, is included here in the slide. So this is something new and exciting from Proliquo to go. And this here is Proliquo to go, the body parts page with some customizations. So in this case, I did go through and specifically add the vocabulary for vagina, penis, and breast. But this was something that I explicitly had to go in and intentionally make those edits and add these words to it. The good news is, though, that the symbols for these body parts were readily available in the system. What you just have to add them to it. Next up is Grid for iPad. And this is specifically the VocoChat vocabulary set. So on the left side of the screen, you'll see that there's the button for swearing. And so then when you tap on swearing, it's going to open up and it's going to give you this page set for swear words. So there are a couple. We have shit, fuck, and crap built in with relevant symbols, but there aren't any others listed here, but you have lots of room for customizations. So the idea is that swearing is already built into the vocabulary set. You just kind of have to fill in the blanks and get creative to add your own. Grid for iPad, same thing. The VocoChat bodies or the VocoChat vocabulary set does have some pretty robust vocabulary for sexual anatomy body parts. They do have a built-in censorship for the images. So on the left side, you can see that it does have the censorship for some of the images. I do have some questions about why my device didn't necessarily censor some of the other ones, but that's okay. But you do have that option to turn the censorship on and off. The nice part about this is that just because you have the censorship turned off or say turned on, it doesn't mean that now you don't have access to these words or the layout of these words within the vocabulary set. It just means that you don't have to see some of these more explicit images if you don't want to. So it still provides access to these body parts automatically built in. It's just a whether or not you want to have the pictures available. So I think that that is a pretty exciting feature, and that it does have some of these words already embedded into the system. So this is also now looking same app, Grid for iPad, but looking at their super core vocabulary set. So in terms of swearing, there is a page set in it for swear words. It does have some similar words built in. We have shit, crap, fuck, and damn. But again, lots of room for customizations here as well. But then the super core vocabulary for the body parts is probably, one of the more extensive ones available at the moment. But you'll see here that this is some pretty good vocabulary. Again, on the left side, I have the symbol set that is censored and blurred out, though again, some of them, I'm not really sure why they're not blurred out, but here we are. But then on the right side, we have a lot of really robust vocabulary, even more than we saw with the VocoChat built in within this grid set for being able to talk about, your reproductive body parts in a lot of good detail with the imagery available here. So this is, something kind of take this idea, and this can absolutely be applied to, any app that has customizations available for people to be able to talk about these types of body parts, especially with doctors when they need that type of medical care, or to be able to report instances of abuse. So some final kind of considerations and thoughts. And I hope the big thing that you really take away from today is that profanity is important, whether you use it or not. It's, a part of human language. It's a part of our, human experience as well. And someone's vocabulary and access to word choice shouldn't be determined by their ability or their disability. AAC users have the right to word choice as much as anyone else. And it's really important to start shifting the mindset that we have around profanity, around taboo words and concepts, as well as sexual health. And these types of words are really going to be often limited in AAC systems. And it usually needs to be a cognizant effort of the AAC user or their supports team to make sure that the person has these words and access to these words within their system. But I do think that a lot of changes are coming. I mean, we saw with some of these apps that, there continues to be changes. More and more of this vocabulary and these features are becoming readily available. And I think that that's really exciting for a lot of folks and a lot of AAC users. So some things too, just to kind of go over quickly, would also be alternative symbol representation ideas. So if our system doesn't have, built-in symbols for some of these concepts, especially things like slang, what can we do? AAC systems. So you can use them to talk about feelings or reactions to different things. I like to have them for telling jokes or using sarcasm. And, children and teens and a lot of young adults really like memes. They're familiar with them. So these are good ways to maybe represent some of that slang that someone might be using or want to have access to. Other things as well, I did mention emojis, and I know someone in the chat mentioned Bitmojis too. So both of those are really great ways to represent different symbols. I've created here on this side, these emojis that I pulled from are from the website called OpenMoji. This is an open source icon type project where you can download and use these emojis. I've made a core board with them. Several years ago with permission from the people. They're actually I think they're located in Germany, who started this project for OpenMoji, but they have all kinds of different emojis that you can use just like you would on your phone. They're obviously going to look a little different, just so they're not, copyright issues with Apple, but you can use these to essentially be their own symbol set. Which is really cool because a lot of people are really already familiar with emojis from texting and using social media. So this can be another way or another option that we think of like along with board maker or symbol stick symbols that we might be familiar with in terms of AAC devices. We could also use emojis. And too, a lot of these emojis can be used for, representing slang or inside jokes, things like that. Another good resource for symbols would be the Noun Project. So a lot of the symbols that you saw on my slides today were, including the one here on this slide, are from the Noun Project website. So they have a variety of symbols that can represent different taboo concepts. They have things like gestures, like if you type like any curse word in there, you're going to find something. There's lots of emote or symbols for like flipping somebody off. There's symbols for reproductive health. A lot of symbols for sexuality, as well as gender identity. So there are a lot of options in there that you might not see in some of the other already existing symbol sets. This can be a great alternative. The Noun Project does have, some like you do have to do attributions if you're using them in certain public formats, but all of that information is available on their website. They do have a subscription option that you can pay a yearly fee. I want to say it's around $30, $40-ish to be able to use any of the symbols without attribution. But all of that information is available there. I know with our work at TechOwl here in Pennsylvania, we have used a lot of their symbols to make different core boards for children as well as adults. So this is a great resource for symbols. So what can you do now? If you are a self-advocate, I hope that you are, able to speak up about the importance of vocabulary access and to advocate for yourself as well as for other people as well to be able to have these words and why they should be able to have these words. It's also important too that you can identify different words and topics and concepts that are important to you so that you can customize your device or expand on already existing folders or vocabulary that's already in your system. I always recommend to people that I work with to create like the profanity or the slang or a sexuality page, whatever they want, to be able to include that and have access to it. And of course, you want to make sure that you have vocabulary to be able to report abuse as well as to be able to talk about your health. If you're a family member or a support person, professional, or other type of caregiver, the things that you can do is that you can really make sure that when you're working with children and teens, that they are getting the vocabulary that their age-matched peers are also using. And so this is something that it also needs to be changed. Children age, their language, they learn that very quickly, and it changes throughout their lifetime. So we want to make sure that we are constantly updating the device to meet the person's needs and to give them the access to that vocabulary so they can participate in the same types of conversations that their peers are having. And we also need to help to program the vocabulary that the AAC user wants. If they need that assistance with programming their device, and we need to do that without judgment, especially for adults. There are definitely words and things that I personally draw my boundaries at, just as a person, but I'm not necessarily, the person who should be judging the adult AAC user of what they want to do and what they want to talk about that. Maybe I make a suggestion like, I shouldn't do that right now, especially if this person is a client of mine, but I'm not going to tell them that they can't have access to that at all. And you also don't remove words that you don't like. Again, there's a lot of words that I don't necessarily like, but it's not my vocabulary, it's not my voice. So I shouldn't be removing those. And there also might be a reason that that person really wants to have access to that word that I might not know about. I think it's also important to advocate for the person that you support and to educate others about the importance of them being able to choose their own vocabulary and have access to this. And you also need to support the person in swearing etiquette and their self-advocacy as well. That goes back to the idea of, having those words at school or, using them in employment. That's something that somebody needs to learn. And if you've never had access to swear words or adult vocabulary, especially if you're an adult, that might be a new skill that you have to learn too. And you have to learn that etiquette now because this is something completely new to you to be able to have access to. So that does conclude the bulk of my presentation. These are just my references. I have 4 pages of references here. And then just a little bit about TechOwl. TechOwl is Pennsylvania's assistive technology program. So I just included the website here as well as our sister website, which is AAC Community. And we have lots of different resources here and information. If you're interested in looking at the different core boards that are based on the Noun project symbols, we do have those available on our AAC Community website as well. I think they might be on the TechOwl website too. So definitely check that out if you're interested. And then here is just my email. If you have any other questions or comments or want to have a discussion about this, I'm happy to, talk to you. This is something that I think is really important to help starting to change the mindset around vocabulary access. So please feel free to email me and reach out. I'd love to chat. And I really want to thank you all for attending and, being open-minded to think about this type of topic and start the conversation around it. And I thank you to WisTech for inviting me. If anybody has any questions, I'm absolutely happy to answer those here while we're still together, as time allows.
Thank you so much, Haley. I think we're all a little blown away by how great your content was. So if anyone has any questions they want to pop into the chat, you are more than welcome to do so. I know we've had a few throughout. While we wait to see if there's any questions, just a reminder that this webinar was recorded. It will be archived on the WisTech YouTube channel. You will receive a survey that will include a link to the handout, as well as information about how to get your CRCs and CEUs. And then don't forget to sign up and register for our next 3 trainings, which will be held in August and September. And let's see, I think we do, let me see if we have any questions. So not seeing any questions. But again, that handout will be in there, and we appreciate your time, Haley. And so excited you could do this for us. And thanks everyone for sitting through in the session and learning today.
Thank you so much for having me. And of course, to everyone who attended, thank you again for being here with me and for listening to me say a lot of bad words. And of course, if you think any of this information over and you want to reach out or you have a question, I'm absolutely happy to answer that. And if you lose my email, if you go to TechOwl, there's a little chat thing. One of my colleagues can always give you my contact. The chat on our website is a person and not a bot.
And I should mention that TechOwl has a great TikTok channel. So
yes.
On assistive technology. So if you're a TikToker, I encourage you to check it out and follow. So thanks everyone. I'm going to be stopping the recording.